Hello, I'm John Sutton and welcome back to Films, Fights and Fitness, my weekly breakdown of everything that's important to me. They say to focus on your followers when you set up a YouTube channel, but I haven't got any, so I don't care. Only kidding, I love you all and thanks for joining me for this third installment. Apologies, I'm later than my usual, I say usual, I've only done two before. My usual Friday, but I had man flu, so I couldn't make it. But I have heard that midweek is actually the best time to promote a video, so maybe I'll make it a permanent change. To be honest, I could have done it Saturday or Sunday, but I had a few too many whiskey chasers at the big Avoth wedding bash on Saturday night, which hasn't helped me to recover. Great night though, love to all the fighting Avoths. Great to catch up. Okay, bit of housekeeping first. Thanks for the feedback. You ask and I deliver. I've got a new mic, so the sound should be a little better, and I've also got a new lighting rig, which is blinding me, so hopefully the picture will be a little clearer too. And I was also told to invest in a backdrop, but I ran out of budget, so I've moved into my man cave instead, hence the random paraphernalia that I've tried to keep as tidy as possible in the frame. Okay, today is a fight special, and we are diving into a spectacle that has everyone talking this week, the big fight between Mike Tyson and Jake Paul this Saturday night on Netflix, of all places. Incidentally, if you haven't seen it yet, have a look at the Netflix documentary, the preview that they put out. Pretty interesting. It was good stuff. As boxing documentaries go, I'm a big fan. And this was better than expected. I thought it'd be a lot more focused on the YouTube sensation behind it all, but no, it was quite grounded, and it did a good job on the Tyson episode. We'll also look at the UFC later on, Stipe versus Jon Jones. But first, Mike Tyson, Jake Paul this Saturday night. It's a classic clash between two different worlds and two massive personalities. We'll dig into who they are, how we got here, and what this matchup means for the sport of boxing. Okay, let's start by looking at who these fighters are. Mike Tyson, as most of us know, is one of the most iconic figures in boxing history. He grew up in Brownsville, Brooklyn, in some pretty challenging conditions, to say the least. And by the time he was a teenager, he had developed a reputation for aggression and incredible power, and had some run-ins with the law until, under the mentorship of Cus D'Amato, he rose through the boxing ranks, becoming the youngest ever heavyweight champion at age 20 when he smashed Trevor Berbick back to the 70s. I think before him it was Floyd Patterson at 21. Could be wrong on that. Tyson's career was defined by his raw power and his success, but also by controversy and personal struggles. Despite retiring years ago, he remains a significant cultural figure with a reach far beyond the ring, perhaps because we've seen him come through those struggles. Jake Paul, on the other hand, couldn't come from a more different world. Raised in Ohio, he found fame through social media with his brother, starting on Vine and YouTube. Initially, he was known for pranks and vlogs, whatever they are, but later decided to take on boxing, facing some pretty considerable skepticism, which is fair enough considering he was the Disney boy. Since then, Jake has built a record and a following that's pretty hard to ignore, to be fair. But are those eyeballs watching for the boxing prowess or just the spectacle itself? The rise of social media tells me it's probably the latter, since he's only fought one real boxer that matches him for size and age since he started. After a few relatively pointless bouts against fellow YouTubers, Jake progressed to fighting former athletes first, and eventually a couple of MMA stars past their prime, who seemed to weigh a little less than he did and who weren't always known for their boxing skills in the first place, but at least they were professional fighters. And that takes some balls when you're not one yourself. But Jake's first true challenge was when he stepped in to fight Tommy Fury. Jake didn't win, but he went the distance, which proves he has the skills and stamina, at least, to compete at Tommy's level, whatever that is. And we know he can bang a little bit as well. It's hard to know how that translates against better boxers. He certainly couldn't do much damage to Tommy Fury. He did catch him, but didn't stop him. Eddie Hearn once called Jake an average boxer, which got him pretty riled up, actually. But Eddie followed up by reassuring him that it was actually a compliment. Being an average boxer, when you've literally just stepped into the sport, is a massive achievement, really. Love him or hate him, the Tommy Fury fight, perhaps also the Mike Perry fight, which Jake dominated, and now the Mike Tyson fight prove that Jake Paul is pretty serious about the sport of boxing. Now, how did we get here? How did a former heavyweight champion, legend, icon, monster, call him what you want, and a social media Disney star end up facing time in the ring together? Well, Tyson's been pretty open about his love for the sport and his willingness to step back into the ring, even at 58, almost 60 years of age, particularly for exhibitions that allow him to reconnect with the fans. We saw this with with his Roy Jones Jr. fight in 2020, which was a little lackluster, to be fair. The headshot seemed a little in doubt. I don't think that's the case with the Jake Paul fight, though. I don't think it's set up. I think both their egos are too big, certainly Jake's. Tyson's return, though, did bring a nostalgic factor and served as a reminder of his deep roots and influence in boxing. For Jake Paul, though, challenging big names is part of his brand. His journey has been all about calling out fighters who attract attention, whether from the boxing world or from MMA, such as Conor McGregor. The proposed matchup between Jake and Tyson was bound to stir opinions because it represented two different eras and styles of boxing. But what ultimately drove the fight were the names and the promise of entertainment. Tyson and Paul have both got a knack for self-promotion and know how to create hype around their fights. And with Jake Paul's digital influence and Tyson's legendary status, it's just a matchup that has promoted itself. Now, what does this mean for boxing? Some say it's an exciting era for the sport with a mix of traditional champions and newer internet-driven names entering the ring. Events like Tyson versus Paul can draw new fans, especially younger audiences who might not typically watch boxing, might not even know Mike Tyson is, other than being a podcaster who smokes a lot of weed. For them, Jake Paul could be the hook. And watching him take on a legend like Tyson creates an entry point into the sport for new fans. I actually remember talking to fighters at an event I was covering from a magazine a few years back, just as the hype around these freak fights was breaking out. I'd expected them to have a negative response to this in the same way they'd reacted to the rise of white-collar boxing. But more than a few were actually excited, saying that the money it brings into the sport gives them potentially a reason to carry on. But there is another side to it. Purists argue that these fights overshadow serious athletes who dedicate their lives to boxing. When spectacle takes centre stage, it can feel like the discipline, the history and the skill behind boxing get overlooked. And the true fans wonder if we're losing respect for the sport's true athletes. However, this fight also highlights a changing model. Boxing is not limited to traditional athletes anymore. It's evolving into a mix of entertainment and sport. While that shift might be controversial, it's undeniable that it keeps boxing in the headlines, attracting attention from new angles. Thinking of this, the biggest winner here might actually be Netflix itself, who have secured the contract to show the fight. Could this spell an end to pay-per-view boxing? If so, then the biggest winners might actually be the fans, and wouldn't that make a nice change? I do feel like boxing is going in that direction lately, thanks to new avenues such as a PFL and the Riyadh season. Say what you like about them, but we are finally seeing the best fight the best at some pretty spectacular events and in a format, especially with Netflix, it's available to everyone, massive audiences, and much easier for fans and casual fans to get involved. Personally, I think fights like these are both a blessing and a bit of a challenge for boxing. On one hand, they bring new fans, new revenue, and a level of excitement that mainstream media can't really ignore. But on the other hand, I do think there's a need to find that balance, respecting the sport, while also recognising its evolution. So who has the edge in a fight like this? With Tyson's raw power and experience, you'd think he has a natural advantage. But you can't ignore Jake's resilience and his knack for preparing strategically for his fights. He's younger, faster and hungry to prove something, potentially. Some people say that Tyson's got some of his old speed back. Now, my prediction is that Tyson brings some of that old magic back at the end of the first round, proving to the fans that the footage going viral of Mike hitting the pads was not sped up, and that Jake will be forced to cover up to avoid getting busted up. But Most of that recent Tyson footage is only available in 30-second bursts, and we don't see how much recovery time Tyson needs between them. I think going into the second round, Jake Paul will start to find a rhythm and pace on the outside that Mike struggles to keep up with as the rounds trickle by. Remember that this is a man half his age. You're talking 60 and 30 more or less. Jake has promised he'd go to war, so I'd settle in for fireworks in the middle rounds when I suspect, hate to say it, that Tyson might gas out and take a knee and he might not get back up. Hope that's not the case, but it's possible. But he won't go down without having clipped Jake and possibly sent him on a trip to the canvas himself, so who knows. I do hate saying these words, but I do see Jake taking the win in the middle to late rounds, but at least setting up a rematch, probably a trilogy. That's where the money is. But what I think isn't important. What do you think? Let me know. Where's your money going? The bookies have actually got Jake in front, I think. But let me know. Leave me a comment below. Okay. Next up, we're diving into one of the most anticipated fights in MMA history, Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic this weekend over in the UFC. Let's start by looking at these fighters outside the cage. Jon Jones, for better or for worse, is one of the most talked about figures in the sport. You could almost liken him to a MMA version of Mike Tyson in some ways. He's had an unmatched career inside the octagon, holding the record for most title defenses in the light heavyweight history. Outside of fighting, though, Jon Jones has faced a lot of personal challenges. He's been in the news for his controversial moments, and he's openly struggled with personal issues over the years, hence the likeness to Tyson. But what makes him unique is that he always bounces back. The question with Jones is always, what kind of fighter are we going to see tonight? And that unpredictability adds a whole layer of excitement. Whether it's those oblique kicks or it's the stamps to the knee or the wrestling, or he can switch anything on whenever he wants by the seams. Those spinning elbows. On the other hand, we have Stipe Miocic. Stipe isn't just a fighter; he's a firefighter and a paramedic, I think, as well. When he's not training, he's literally out there saving lives. He is a bit more low-key in his day-to-day life. He doesn't make the headlines the same way Jon Jones does, but he's a workhorse and one of the most respected figures in the game. Stipe is known as the heavyweight GOAT, holding the record for most title defenses in heavyweight history, which is a testament to his resilience and commitment. He's also a lovely guy by the seams of things. Now let's talk about their legacies. For Jon Jones, his legacy is complicated. He's undeniably one of the most talented fighters we've ever seen, perhaps the best ever, perhaps pound for pound best ever, even now, regardless of ever. But his career has been marked by some controversy. If he can beat Stipe, it cements his claim as the greatest of all time, not just in his division, but in MMA history. Moving up to heavyweight and taking out the GOAT would be an incredible feat, even for a career as stacked as his. For Stipe, this fight is a chance to prove he's still at the top. He's coming off a tough loss to Ngannou, and a win against Jones could give him that final stamp on his legacy. I fear that perhaps Ngannou did a little too much damage, if I'm honest, in that fight, but it was a comeback fight. Stipe had already beaten him once, so they were even Stevens there. But beating Jon Jones would be huge. He'd go down not just as the heavyweight GOAT, but as the guy who took down one of the greatest fighters ever. For Stipe, it's about respect and reaffirming his place as a true legend. So what does this fight mean to each of them? Well, again, for Jones, it's about adding a chapter to his story of redemption and proving he can conquer at any weight class. And for Stipe, it's about showing he's still the best heavyweight around, even against a fighter as iconic as Jon Jones. Without Ngannou around, there is an argument to make there. We've got Aspinall, of course, but he's not quite in the mix with these two yet, I guess. The fight has all the makings of a legendary battle, though. You can see the previews on YouTube right now, the 24/7 documentaries, and that is it. Look at the Netflix documentary about Tyson and Jake Paul too. I've got Jake Paul, and I'm going to go for Jon Jones as well in the second one. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I'll be back later in the week with a catch-up session, seeing as I did skive off last week, so I'm still going to do one on Friday. There'll be focus on some film reviews and the next Bond, which I've been promising for a couple of episodes now. The bookies odds there. But also a little bit more fight news, and I might even get to some fitness news at some point, but let's wait and see what happens. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Please subscribe. Please keep an eye on the channel, and feel free to leave any comments that you like. Positive feedback, though, please, guys. Cheers. Until next week. Thank you.